When Temple Grandin was 2 years old, doctors advised her mother to institutionalize her for life as a result of a diagnosis of autism. That was 70 years ago. Today, Dr. Grandin, who has an earned doctorate in animal science, is a professor at Colorado State University, a sought-after consultant to the industry of livestock on animal behavior, and an international autism spokesperson. She credits a summer on her aunt's ranch for instilling in her a passion for nature, machinery, and animals. But what happens if a child is sheltered from the typical experiences of childhood? How does a passion grow? This is Ali. Ali is my neighbor's grandson. Now, this is a fairly recent photo, but I first learned about Ali in the summer of 2014 when his grandmother and I were discussing the new nature center at Letchworth State Park. She said that Ali, who lives in Albany, loves the park, but he probably wouldn't be able to enjoy a nature center because he has autism. And at age 7 was still without language and in a state of almost constant agitation. Except, his grandmother said, when he would come to visit her and she would take him to Letchworth. There she saw a completely different little boy, somehow at peace in the beauty of his favorite spot along the park's Gibsonville Trail. I made some broad statement about the healing powers of nature, but my neighbor shook her head and said, no, it's only Letchworth that has this effect on him. Oh, he likes to be outside, she said, but there's something very special about Letchworth. I just happened to mention this conversation a short time later to an acquaintance, Susan Hernstein, and she was struck by the story, telling me that she too has a grandson with autism who lives in New York City and who begs to go to Letchworth when she comes to visit him, to visit her. We thought this was much more than coincidence. So this began an exhaustive search into answering the question, why Letchworth? It led us to a dialogue with Dr. Michael Terman of Columbia University, whose research has demonstrated that a concentration in nature of negative ions produces a positive effect on human beings' general well-being. I told him the story of Ali, and he asked about the park. Is there the presence of moving water? Absolutely. The Genesee River runs right through the middle of the park. Is there a deep pine forest? Sure, there's pine trees everywhere. These two elements in nature present the highest concentration of negative ions, Dr. Terman told me, and are present in Letchworth, moving water, pine forests, and likely are giving a beneficial effect to all visitors, but maybe more so for some like Ali. Susan and I wondered, what could we do to share this calming effect of Letchworth State Park with persons with autism and the people who care for them, so that they would feel comfortable and welcome visiting Buffalo's favorite state park? Suppose there was a nature trail designed specifically for persons with autism spectrum disorder and other developmental disabilities. What would it look like, and what could we do to bring it to fruition? So I sent a Hail Mary email to Temple Grandin at Colorado State University, and I outlined the story up to this point. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from her assistant, and she said that Dr. Grandin had been intrigued by my email and that I should expect to hear from her. Less than a half hour later, my phone rang and a voice said, "This is Temple Grandin." I have to admit, I was starstruck, but I had to concentrate because this icon in the world of autism was telling me that she was excited about our idea and that she wasn't aware of anything else like it anywhere. Her recommendations came quickly and enthusiastically. Don't build a strip mall nature trail, she told me. Even though others are going to try to get you to move it to a city, you have found a place in deep nature, stay there. Look for program planners who have experience in the outdoors and an expertise with autism, not one or the other, she said. They may be hard to find, but they're going to be worth the search. She urged us to design a pre-station to orient the visitor and to make the trail a loop so that the end was evident at the beginning, because that sense of security is important. And she said, provide challenges for someone who may never have been on a nature trail, but also build in predictability and choice, including opportunities to opt out of the experience. There may be meltdowns, she said. Be prepared to deal with them safely. Well, Susan and I knew we needed to reach out to someone who had expertise we did not have. So Susan called her friend and neighbor, Gail Cerventi, a speech and language pathologist who had just retired from the State University of New York at Geneseo. Gail convened an impressive advisory panel of all volunteer academics and practitioners in speech and occupational and physical therapy, autism, and special education. Rick Hauser of Insight Architecture in Perry drafted some ideas, and the Autism Nature Trail, or the ANT for short, was born. Now, you don't just announce that you're building something in Letchworth State Park. We knew we had to make a compelling case for the need for the trail. We knew we did not want to get embroiled in the cause and cure controversy of autism. We were about inclusion, including everyone in nature, all families, all schools, all agencies. We also knew that we didn't want to be tied to the state budget, worrying every April if there would be funding to support the trail. So, with the understanding that Susan, Gail, and I, as volunteers, would raise the money for this project, a schematic design was developed of a 1-mile looped trail with 8 stations to build sensory processing and sensory perception skills. And in August of 2016, New York State Parks in Albany approved the plan in theory and dedicated about a dozen acres near the new nature center for the project, also agreeing to provide existing visitor amenities such as parking and restrooms and Wi-Fi, all contingent on the ability of Gail, Susan, and me raising nearly $4 million to build and endow the trail. 2 years after the idea had been born, our journey was just starting. Let me say this right now. Fundraising is hard. And what made our task even more difficult was we didn't have anything that we could point to and say, we want to build an autism nature trail like this one. And we had made a deal with New York State Parks that we would raise $2 million of the projected $3.7 million total budget before we would go public with the project. So we had nothing to point to, and even though we understood the quiet phase, like when a college is building a new library or a hospital is putting on a new wing, we had no previous donor list, we had no alumni, we had no ability to widely publicize the project. But word of the ANT spread anyway. And the people who were going to use it most widely gave us incredible feedback, which we used to guide every decision along the design. A Buffalo woman, for example, told us that her teenage daughter liked to be outdoors, but suffered severe anxiety about getting lost in the woods. The design team spent an entire day sketching out identical large stone markers for each station and added 38 vertical ants for all along the trail to build absolute confidence in wayfinding. An agency worker from Livingston County told me she had just put her mother in a memory care unit. An outdoors woman her entire life, she was now confined to a 9-by-9-foot room. But with the aunt, this daughter would be able to plan trips to Letchworth on the weekend, and her mother would be able to hike again. We hadn't considered needs of older visitors, but stone dust for the main trail surface made it accessible by walker or wheelchair or stroller, and it also made the aunt ADA compliant. We heard a story of an 8-year-old child, nonverbal with autism, who couldn't tolerate the feel of a gravel driveway, although it took the family months to figure it out. Based on that story, a station called the Playful Path was constructed, where various surfaces can be tried out, log grounds and river stones and sand and others, but always with the main trail just a hop away. We also heard that persons on the spectrum often enjoy finding patterns and seeing repetitive features. Think of hidden Mickeys at Disney World. So we commissioned a granite artist to carve hidden creatures in the boulders at the reflection zone to be discovered. But probably the overwhelming concern by parents and caregivers was the idea of a meltdown in public, and it affected their entire lives. We heard, we've never finished a meal at a restaurant. We've never been to the end of a church service. We've never gotten everything we need at the grocery store in one trip. Worse yet, some families just stopped trying. So we built in 2 gliders and 3 cuddle swings at key points along the trail for gentle, soothing movement. And we added alone zones where a visitor can decompress without having to run off to the parking lot for the car. 2 summers ago, at a scheduled butterfly release program at the Nature Center near the site of the trail, Elijah Kruger was getting ready to, in his role as educational and environmental educator, to place butterflies on the fingers of participating children. A woman and 2 little boys stopped by just wanting to see where the trail was going to be built. And as Elijah started to hand out the newly emerged butterflies, a little boy from this mother was suddenly at his elbow with a finger extended, asking for a butterfly. The mother rushed over and said to Elijah, he has autism, and anything that flies terrifies him. And she tried to distract the child, but he was insistent and held out his finger. Finally, the mother bit her lip and nodded reluctantly, and Elijah placed a butterfly in the little boy's finger. He was clearly afraid, but he started to talk to the butterfly. You're not so bad. You're not that scary. You're a good butterfly. And the butterfly opened its wings and closed its wings, and it did not fly. Elijah eventually had to take the butterfly and put it on a plant, and the mother, now in tears, said she couldn't believe what had just happened. Her son, so afraid of things that fly, had never volunteered for any kind of activity. It was an aha moment for Elijah, who realized that the ant not only was going to allow people to appreciate nature on their own terms and at their own pace, but it was going to give caregivers and parents enough confidence to allow these experiences to happen. We've come full circle to Dr. Grandin's basic truth. When a child is missing the experiences of a typical childhood, that child misses opportunities for a new interest, a natural inclination, a lifelong passion. But on a broader level, we were also seeing that what was good for this specific population was going to be good for everyone. It's known as the curb cut effect. As part of the 1990 American with Disabilities Act, which mandated changes in the built environment, including cuts in the curbs of major intersections, so that a wheelchair crossing the street was no longer a barrier to mobility. The unintended consequence was that lots of people liked them. Mothers with strollers, elderly people with walkers, bikers and skateboarders, workers with carts, travelers with wheeled luggage, even musicians and artists toting big instruments and portfolios. As we applied our own little slice of curb cut thinking to this project, other people recognized it, and they have generously supported it. I am thrilled to report that as of today, we have raised $3.4 million from 600 individual donations to support the ant in perpetuity. And we celebrated. On October 1st, we had a ribbon cutting ceremony, and we welcomed visitors, all visitors, to the Autism Nature Trail at Letchworth State Park. The day was bittersweet as we dedicated the trail to my dear friend and co-creator, Susan Gownlock-Herrnstein, who died September 5th of complications from COVID. Susan had hoped that the ant would be an exemplar, widely replicated, and taking what we learned in our 7-year journey of creating a first-of-its-kind experience in nature and applying it elsewhere. I hope that we'll stop tinkering with inclusion and start with the end in mind. While others try to retrofit a public place and make it accessible, we created an accessible place and made it public. And that made all the difference. Thank you.